Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the KOBCast. Today we are going to be talking about Jemison from Knitting Outside the Box 1. This is in the chapter on using stitches to manipulate your gauge, which is one of my favorite things about knitting. In proper British fashion, everyone's gonna make fun of me for that accent. I guess I deserve that. In proper British fashion, I'm gonna issue apologies up front. One, my husband is working on our garage, which is like right there, and doing lots of sawing and banging and stuff like that, because we found out that the entire support system underneath the garage doesn't really exist anymore. It's mostly rotted out wood, so we're replacing that. Yay, home ownership. And then two, it is getting dangerously close to my cat George Michael's first dinner time, because he has two, because it's a long story. It's easier if he has two dinner times, or he would eat us alive. So if he comes visiting, that's what that noise is. Or if you hear sawing, we're fixing the garage. So yay, adult responsibilities. Anyway, so Jemison is all about the differences in gauge between the brioche panel here in the center and the reverse stockinette everywhere else. And it's a really fun way to play with that, because what brioche does is it has a gauge that is about 2 times as many rows per inch as you'll see in stockinette. So what it does, and this is stretched out a bit because it's been around the block a little bit, but what it does is that the circumference of the brioche section is narrower than the circumference of the stockinette section. It pulls it in, it ruches it a little bit, and it creates some kind of visual tension between the reverse stockinette on one part and the brioche on the other part. Really fun to play with, really cool way to play with different yarns. This one uses Spincycle Dyed in the wool for the color changing, and then Sincere Sheep Cormo Sport for the stockinette, both of which I absolutely love. Total bucket list yarns. Highly recommend if you haven't had a chance to work with them. One thing though to notice is that this is a tube, okay? And what that means is that at some point you have to graft your brioche. Since that tends to make people run for the hills, what I'm going to do today is give you a little demo on how we make that work, both in terms of the instructions that are in the book, and then I've learned a little bit since I first wrote that, and another potential way to make it happen. All right, so let's get started. So one thing to pay attention to when you're grafting pieces together is the direction of your knitting. So sometimes you're going to have two pieces where you have raw knit edge and raw knit edge, so they're both aiming this way, and you're knitting together and you're working together the stitches themselves. Okay, so this stitch meets this stitch meets this stitch, all the way across. Other times what you'll do is you'll start with a provisional cast on, like we did in Jemison, and you will join that end with the provisional cast on to the working edge. And what that does is that instead of lining things up tip to tip, stitch to stitch, is that it offsets everything a half stitch. Okay, because if we look at what a provisional cast on does, if these are our original stitches, and I use my hands a lot for demo because they're big, if these are our original stitches that we provisionally cast on for, these negative spaces here are what we go back and pick up when we're doing our unravel of our provisional cast on. So what we're picking up is that running thread between the stitches. Okay, so what that means is that when we come back to that, so if these are now, this tip here is now my working stitches, those running threads are going to slip together like that and kind of nest in between. Okay, and that's hopefully if we do Kitchener stitch right. And I will fully admit that sometimes I pick it out and do it again. It's okay to do it a couple of times. But what it means is that things are going to go a little bit more seamless when you go from a provisional cast on to a working edge than if you have two working edges going together. Really cool. All right, so as you can see here, I have my working stitches up on the needle up here, and then I've unzipped my provisional cast on and popped that onto a spare needle here. So apologies for kind of any rattling that happens during this because it's got a lot of needles going. But what you can see on the spare needle is what I'm grabbing is that. And you can see very clearly in this yarn, because I chose black and white to work with, this is that running thread between this column of stitches and this column of stitches. Okay, it's a really funny setup with brioche because we have those two different colors. And if you look on the back, it's a little bit of a mess going on here, but we're gonna go with it. It's gonna be just fine. So the first thing I'm gonna show you is how to graft using the method that I use in Knitting Outside the Box for Jemison. So what I'll do is I'm gonna bring these two sides together. So I have, this is my working stitches here in the front, and my other needle in the back. Words are helpful. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to pop my working yarn onto a tapestry needle, thread that through. I'm gonna bring both my needle tips to the end here. It gets a little messy here. That's okay. It'll get easier. So we've got our needle tips together. We've got our working needle in the front, and we've got our crochet provisional cast on, those stitches that we cast on here, in the back. So the way that this is set up is it has you start with one stitch remaining and reverse stockinette stitch on either needle before you get into the brioche. And what that does is it makes sure that the connection between the reverse stockinette and the brioche is relatively seamless. Now we're working on straight brioche, so I'm going to skip those two setup stitches so we just can kind of get right into it, but make sure you take a look at those when you work on the pattern themselves. So what we're going to be doing in the brioche gets us so that we maintain that rib structure on this front needle with this working yarn. Okay, so we're going to start in the pattern with step one. So I'm going to insert my tapestry needle, and I'm working with the white yarn here on my tapestry needle. I'm going to insert the tapestry needle through the first stitch knitwise. I'm going to make sure I keep everything on my back needle and take it off. And then, rather than my normal, which would be to go through here purlwise, I'm going to do another knitwise and leave it on. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is we're going to go through the back. The first one, purlwise and off. Second one, knitwise and on. Okay, so that's the same as normal Kitchener stitch. All right, step two is always going to be the same as normal Kitchener stitch on the back needle. So we don't have to do anything special back here. It's always going to be purlwise and off, knitwise and on. Step three, I'm going to go through purlwise, first stitch on the front needle and off, and then purlwise through the new front stitch on the first needle and leave it on. And as I do that, I'm grabbing both strands of that BRK, that slip one in the yarn over from the previous row. Step four, we get to repeat what we did back here. So purl off, insert knitwise, and leave it on. And we'll go back to step one again. So we're going to go through this stitch knitwise and take it off, go through this stitch knitwise and leave it on. Step two is the back needle. That's going to be purlwise and off, knitwise and on. Step three, I'm going to clean that up a little bit. There we go. Step three, we're going to go through, make sure I got everything in the right place. Yes, okay. Step three, we're going to go through purlwise on the front needle and off,
purlwise on the front needle and on. Step 4, purlwise on the back needle and off, knitwise on the back needle and on. Let me do that again. It's gotten stuck there. And I'm not pulling tight yet, but you can see we have a knit stitch there. We have a purl stitch here. Let's do it again from step 1. Knitwise and off on the front needle. Knitwise and on. I caught myself there because I was about to go into autopilot. Purlwise and off on the front, back on the back, knitwise and on the back. That's step 2. Step 3, we're going to go purlwise and off, purlwise and on the front needle. And then step 4, purlwise and off on the back needle, knitwise and on the back needle. Let's do that again, 1 through 4. So step 1, again, knitwise and off on the front needle, knitwise and on the front needle, purlwise and off on the back needle, knitwise and on the back needle. Then we have purlwise and off on the front needle, purlwise and on the front needle, purlwise and off on the back needle, knitwise and on the back needle. So as we come to it, you can see we're following the pattern of the stitches. And this is what I have written for Jemison, and this works perfectly fine. But one thing you might be seeing is that we're kind of missing some of the brioche pattern here on those purl columns. When I wrote this pattern, this worked. I was like, okay, this makes sense to me, I can do it. But since then I've gone, okay, well, what would happen if I tried to do actual brioche with my grafting and see if we could get it to line up absolutely perfectly? So I did some research, and there is a way. Let's do that for the rest of our stitches. All right, as you can see, I've put a couple new tricks in place for this one. One, I find it a lot easier when I'm doing the brioche Kitchener stitch to put it onto waste yarn. So what I've done is I've threaded all of those stitches, a little schmutz there, sorry, all of my live stitches onto waste yarn, and then all of my provisionally cast on stitches that I picked up onto waste yarn. The second thing I did, so that we can really see what's going on, really stretch it out, is I put it on a pool noodle. This is because this is such a small circumference swatch, words are easy, that this was the best option to make sure that I had it stretched out. Anytime that you're doing something like this, put it on a flat surface. Make your life a little bit easier by giving yourself a flat plane to work with. Okay, so you can see here's both of my strands. We're going to use both of these going forward. And you can also see now that it's stretched out, this is what it looked like when we did our original Kitchener stitch, or modified Kitchener stitch as written in pattern. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this time with my CC, with my black yarn. I'm going to thread that onto my tapestry needle. You can see I've got this anchored by a couple tapestry needles here, so it's nice and kind of matching the gauge of what I'm used to. I'm gonna get that out of the way. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to go from front to back through the purl stitch on my front needle, okay? By going front to back, what we're doing is we're putting the purl bump in the front of the work and preserving that as a purl structure. So I'm going to go through that front to back. I'm going to rotate this towards me a little bit. And you can see here, I've kind of pulled it up a little bit. We have the same structure in black as we have in white here. And I'm going to thread through and make that a little bit bigger so you can see. I'm going to thread through those loops from right to left. I'm going to go back through my stitch down here from back to front, and again, as I do that, see how it's making that purl bump right there? And then the final step is I'm going to go under those strands there. That's the same as creating that yarn over in brioche. Okay, I'm going to skip the white stitch here, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the next black one. I'm going to go front to back, pull it through. I'm not going to tighten it too much now. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to find those loops of the black. You can see they're just kind of hanging out here. Where are you? There we go. One and. Come here, you sucker. I know you're there. One and. Two. Goodness, that was more difficult than it usually is. It's usually a little bit easier than that. Okay, go through. And we want to make sure they're oriented like that V. So you can see pretty clearly on the one above it, you got 1, 2. So we want to make sure we've got 1, 2. I'm going to go through that. And then I come back and go through this stitch down here, back to front. Finish that purl. Come across, go through the white to create that yarn over. Right now, looks like a hot mess. Totally okay, we got this. Let's do it again. So we're gonna go through the next black from front to back. That rhymed. We're gonna find, stretch that down, we're gonna find the V on the next section. And it's okay if to pick it up, you kind of have to just dig in there and find the strand. Once you've got it, you can reorient it. Okay, so I've got it on there as a V. It does occur to me that using black yarn may not have been my best choice, but it's a nice contrast to the white. Feels very harkening back to my ska roots of my late teens. And then we'll go back to front and through. Go to the next one, front to back. Dig around in here and find that V. So there's number 1, and there's number 2. Get that spare yarn out of the way. Pull that through. And then come on back to front. There we go. Back to front. Once that's through the next white. Almost there. Grab that. Next one. Front to back. Come up here. Find that bottom V. Make sure my head's not in camera. There we go. 1 and 2. Okay, we got them. Now let me reorient them. Go that way through that one. That way through that one so that it creates that V. Come through. Back to front. Under the white. one last time, and I'm gonna let these needles go here because I need to now work those stitches. I come through this final one, back to front. You want to make sure you don't go under this in any way because you'll create a knot. I'm gonna skip under my selvage stitch there and come back through back to front. You want to make sure you're not splitting the stitch like I am. There we go. And breathe, because that's part one. You see how that's all lined up nicely? We're going to do the same thing with the white. So that's pass one, you're going to do pass two. So same as you would do with brioche normally. You go across with one color, you go across with the other color. We're just going to do the background color first this time so that it is in the background. Because now when we work with the main color, that's going to sit on the front. So the first thing we do is we go back up to that V that we went through and make our yarn over. Okay, then we can come through the first white, back to front, and under our white right there, front to back. Okay, so this is what's written in the pattern. This is what's going to get us our actual brioche. All right, I'm going to go through the V on the black. That's going to make our little yarn over. And then I'm going to come down to the white, back to front, up through the V, right to left, back through the white stitch, front to back. So it's starting to get easier, and you can start to see just how seamlessly it's working. You go through the black V, it's our yarn over, back to front on the white, through the V right to left on the white, front to back on that stitch. The pool noodle is nice because you have something to grab onto and you can roll it back and forth when you need to get to the stuff. Through the V, through the stitch, back to front, through the V, through the stitch, front to back. So on the black, I went front to back, back to front. On the white, I'm doing back to front, front to back. That's what's creating a purl stitch versus a knit stitch. I'm going to go through my black V, back to front, through my white, right to left, through my white V, front to back, through my white V. Then I can come up in that same place, that there, I'll do that and pull it through. When I pull that out, it's a little loosey-goosey yet, but grafting and brioche. Okay, so definitely check out some more in-depth tutorials, but I wanted you to know that this is possible. Okay, this is what's written in the pattern. Perfectly wonderful. Works really, really well. I love it on the sample because you have those nice Spincycle colors on the original sample making that work. But if you want to take it one step further, you can make sure that it's a seamless brioche graft. Whoever thought we'd say those words, right? Seamless brioche graft? Wild.
I hope you enjoyed that little glance into how we make brioche bend to our will. Again, Jemison is part of Knitting Outside the Box, the first book, the Uno, and is named after Mae Jemison, who is one of the first women astronauts out there and first Black women astronaut in the United States, which is really, really exciting. My hope at some point is that once these books have kind of had their time and I've gotten to wear the samples all I wanted to, I'd love to be able to send the samples to the women or to the women's families that inspired them. So if anyone knows Mae Jemison, give me a call. We'll figure this out. Anyway, hope you had a good time learning about grafting brioche, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.